Newsnight is going on the road. You're invited to join us October 2nd for a live recording of Newsnight Conversations, Election 2024, at the Bev Event Centre in Kissimmee. Registration is open at wucf.org/newsnightelection. This week on Newsnight, a conversation about the science of hurricane prediction with one of the country's top tropical weather meteorologists.
Helene is kind of a nasty example of what can happen when you put a storm in a very conducive environment, such as it was under when it was in the Gulf of Mexico.
Plus, a look at the resiliency work taking place in coastal and inland areas.
Being a resilient community for us means that we can survive that, we can bounce back faster because we know and we're prepared for what is coming.
Newsnight starts now. Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take a deep dive into the stories and issues that matter to Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, a reminder this week that we're still in the thick of hurricane season here in Florida. With Hurricane Helene making landfall in the state, forecasts for this storm proved to be remarkably consistent for several days, showing a direct hit in the Panhandle and Big Bend. Helene marked an abrupt end to an unexpectedly quiet season leading up to the current peak period. That's in stark contrast to the predictions of a record-setting year at the start of the season. Of course, any tropical system that hits anywhere in Florida or elsewhere makes it a bad season for that location. Well, to discuss the art and science of hurricane forecasting, I chatted with Phil Klotzbach, part of a team of meteorologists at Colorado State University that puts together an annual forecast for hurricane season.
This actually is a pretty good example of what we see during the early and late season. We have this phenomenon known as the Central American gyre, which is basically this broad area of that kind of spins up during the early and late season. And this wasn't necessarily a pure gyre case, but definitely formed from a very broad circulation, which is why Helene has been such a big storm. So this time of year, that is the kind of genesis that you expect. And obviously Helene is kind of a nasty example of what can happen when you put a storm in a very conducive environment, such as it was under when it was in the Gulf of Mexico. We have both a very, very warm Gulf of Mexico. Now, the Gulf of Mexico is certainly warm enough to support any nasty hurricane this time of year. The waters are plenty warm. Right now, they are actually running up somewhat warmer than normal. We had both very kind of weak winds blowing across the Gulf of Mexico the last few weeks, which have basically kind of reduced the evaporation and led to some anomalous warming. So the warmth is very warm there right now. But we also tend to have right now in the Gulf of Mexico low levels of vertical wind shear. So basically the winds around the storm basically aren't really trying to tear the storm apart. So that helped allow the storm to intensify quite significantly as well. Because there's certainly been cases where we've had storms in the Gulf that haven't strength, and they've even weakened just because, say, the shear is too strong or it's too dry. Sometimes we get a lot of dry air in the Gulf. In the case of Helene, we didn't have much dry air either.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. What is your projection for the rest of the season now?
Yeah, so things are actually looking a lot busier than they have. Obviously, we're comparing it with a period that was extremely quiet. Helene seems to have kind of broken through. And the period coming up does actually look quite busy. There's several different areas that look like they may go in the next week or two. If you look at some of the long-range projections, both from the Climate Prediction Center's weekly outlooks, they're forecasting potential additional genesis both in the main development region, so east of, say, the Lesser Antilles, as well as potentially additional development in the Gulf of Mexico, maybe Western Caribbean. So certainly, this is the time of year we still don't want to let our guard down. We're just getting through September. We still have October and November to go. And certainly October can brew very significant hurricanes. So certainly now's the time to just make sure you have your plans in place and you're ready to go if storms do threaten where you live.
But there is some nervousness, isn't there, about the modeling? Even with the improved science behind hurricane prediction, there is still a lot of uncertainty, right?
So if we're looking kind of at bulk numbers, obviously we're not done with the season yet, but, it'd be some sort of crazy thing to get the numbers up to exactly what we forecast, given just how long the season was below normal. So, but it's interesting if you look from a landfall perspective, we've already had 4 U.S. hurricane landfalls this year for the continental U.S., which is the most since 2020. And the only other 2 years that we had 4+ landfalls were 04 and 05. So it's been very busy from a landfall perspective. So from an impacts perspective, it's been busy, but overall basin-wide, it's certainly been a lot quieter than ourselves and other groups were anticipating. Where right now we're sitting at 5 hurricanes. We predicted 12. So, I mean, certainly we can see more between now and the end of the season, but it would be something really nuts to get 7 more hurricanes before the end of the year. So, it does go to show that, we have modeling, we have both statistical models, and we use numerical weather prediction models using, that basically are based on supercomputers, all of this data that we have available. But still, at the end of the day, the best models and the best data that we have can sometimes still lead to very surprising results like we've seen so far this year. Certainly how we've talked in July or early August, I would not have expected we'd be sitting at 5 hurricanes in the later part of September.
Phil Klotzbach there. A reminder, you can always find information on hurricane season on our website. Be sure to visit wucf.org/storms for more. All right, next tonight, hurricane season is always a concern for both coastal and inland areas of our state. In recent years, resiliency has become a major priority for both the state and federal governments. Earlier this year, Newsnight hosted a discussion on resiliency efforts in our state and the work being done to shore up our coastline and vulnerable inland areas too. Tonight, we wanted to bring you a portion of that discussion from May. Joining me in the studio now to talk about resiliency efforts here in Central Florida are Lisa Soto. She's Operations Director for Applied Ecology. Applied Ecology works with cities, counties, and the state on environmental resource management, ecological studies, and more. Dr. Soto has been working in the field of Florida's water resources for more than 30 years, including shoreline restoration. Darcy McGee, Assistant Director of Brevard County's Natural Resources Management Department. Brevard's beach management program administers several beach restoration projects to protect property and maintain healthy beaches. Courtney Barker, she's been City Manager of Satellite Beach since 2013. Satellite Beach established a Green Committee in 2015. It's also published its first Sustainability Action Plan in 2017. And Jennifer Rupert. She's the Regional Resiliency Officer for the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. The council, established in 1962, is an area-wide association of governments. Its members provide project, policy, and planning assistance to governments and organizations within 8 counties in the East Central Florida region. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Really appreciate your time today. Let me start with a broad question for each of you. How do you define coastal resilience? I mean, if you had to explain it to somebody in the ride up an elevator, what does it mean to have a resilient coastline? And I'll start with you, Lisa.
Well, I think resiliency is about planning and being adaptable. So trying to understand what's coming at you so you can be prepared for it. So it's really just a matter of, being able to collect the information that you need to know to predict what's about to happen to you in the next time frame, be it 50 years or 100 years, so you can be prepared. So with cities and counties and governments, it's a big deal. We do a lot of installations with the military to prepare them. They've got missions that they need to get accomplished. But even households, we're always planning, right, for maintenance, for things that are coming at us. So resiliency is really just a different kind of a planning mechanism.
Sure. What do you think, Darcy?
We define that as the ability to bounce forward, to look at people, places, and prosperity and plan for the future so that we can bounce forward and now bounce back from any kinds of shocks and stressors.
Yeah. Courtney, how do you view resiliency?
I view it as, the term came out really as a way to describe how cities and counties and local government are going to respond to the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. And that includes everything from the increased heat to the eroding shorelines to even water quality issues and storms. Flooding. So being a resilient community for us means that we can survive that, we can bounce back faster because we know and we're prepared for what is coming. So, and that really is in the face of changing climates.
And you mentioned storms, and of course that's particularly relevant this year because it's predicted that we'll have a fairly busy season. Hopefully we don't, of course. Jennifer, what do you think?
We do use the ability to bounce forward, respond to, and recover from, I think, shocks and stressors is the kind of common theme. So those short-term shocks, hurricanes, infrastructure failures, those kinds of things, and those longer term stressors. That does include climate change. It does include affordable housing. It includes shifting economic trends. So kind of looking at it holistically from that people, places, and prosperity perspective is, I think, what all local governments and people are challenged to. And I think in layman's terms, it's really, how are we setting ourselves up for success? As you're walking out the door in the morning, what do you do to set your family and yourself up for success? And I think local governments are applying that same type of mantra in things that we do and plan for.
You guys mentioned there about the causes of the resiliency issues that we face, and I wonder whether we can pinpoint everything. I mean, there's climate change, sea level rise, but there's also other things, right? I mean, the development that we've done on dunes over the years, stronger storms. What do you see as the main causes for the resiliency issues that we face today, Lisa?
We're really struggling with what to do with our floodplain areas in Florida. We've got an awful lot of low-lying wetland areas and floodplain areas that is where everybody wants to live. And so historically, that has been compromised, and now they're about to be taken back, right? So with sea level rise and groundwater rise, there are just low-lying areas are going to fill in. And that's not just on the coast. So the rivers are going to fill up, the low-lying wetlands are going to fill up, everything's going to fill up very slowly, gradually. So that's a big issue where we're still seeing, developers going in and getting variances today to build right in those flood areas. So that's a big change that needs to happen, and that's a sentiment, a political change, a political wind that needs to change entirely. We need to stop building in the areas where we have potential storage for all this water that's coming.
As Lisa said, the flooding is a big one. And, Brevard County's got St. Johns River, Banana River, Indian River Lagoon, Sykes Creek, and the Atlantic coast, and that's a lot of coastline. So there's different shocks and stressors in all those areas, but I think a common theme is certainly flooding.
I mean, as somebody who runs a city or is involved in running a city, Courtney, I mean, there's got to be a lot of other factors, and I wonder whether there is an economic imperative to this as well. I mean, when you took over in that job, what was it that caused you to focus so much on that particular issue? Does this go beyond just the environmental impacts? Do you have to be concerned about other things that can be affected by that?
Yeah, so a really good example is our fire station and our public works building. Both of those buildings were in a flood zone. The public works building was in total bad shape. And then with the fire station, they were running out of room. And do we put a second story on a fire station that's in a flood zone that we might have to move in 30 years? You can make a very costly mistake by not doing that forward planning. So it's definitely an economic decision.
I mean, there are, of course, economic decisions for individuals as well, right? I mean, we talk about property insurance and the crisis in that market in our state all the time. And I just wonder whether any of you are concerned about this issue that sometimes we see after major storms, which is called climate gentrification, where basically people can't afford to live in their communities that they may have grown up in for generations because of the climate impacts. What do you think, Lisa?
I thought it was an interesting word, climate gentrification, and I've been watching it happen regardless of climate my entire life here in Florida. Something that's similar is what we describe in academia as the managed retreat.
Yes.
There's the potential that cities and counties could somehow plan to remove people from danger's way. Yeah. It's in theory, it's in the literature, and I'd love to see the mechanisms, like you were talking about, to make that happen. Because we're trying to visualize this managed retreat and what the big picture, do you guys ever do that? What this is gonna look like for the beachfront properties, for those properties that, when we get the 22-foot storm surge or something horrible, that they're just completely annihilated. Who's gonna pick up that rubble and put it all back together? The insurance companies, I think, are pulling out of the coastal areas already.
Well, and we've lost 8 in the state of Florida, right? Insurance companies have become insolvent, and I think there's examples across the country. Norfolk, Virginia, has already kind of carved out an area where they're no longer going to be investing in their infrastructure and rebuilding it. So they're saying they've hit the tipping point. We can't hold the water back anymore. Therefore, we are no longer going to maintain, manage, and reinvest in this particular area because the water is going to be there. So, and therefore, we need to move people away from that area. So there are examples of that happening.
We haven't had a structure lost to erosion since we've started our beach renourishment project. However, we've had some undermining where a portion of the home, our codes require you to move back, right? That's the smart thing to do. But the insurance companies have been either not have insurance or especially this last storm, Nicole, treated the owners terribly. And their only recourse was to sell their property. And there is no lack of people that have cash. They don't need insurance, and they now are building to new standards, which is the homes on pilings, on stilts, go way down into the ground. So if they're undermined, they're still sitting there. That is the gentrification that we're seeing, is that the people that grew up there can no longer afford to redo their house, move it back. They've got to sell out, and you've got people coming from out of our county that just, they want to live there. They want to get as close as they can to the beach, and it's not maybe the best decision.
Where do you come down on this, Courtney?
I agree with Darcy. That's what we're seeing is people who grew up in the area can no longer afford to live there, and insurance has priced many people out. Me personally, I'm on the third insurance company in 3 years, so my insurance has tripled in 3 years. So it's very expensive, and we're going to see a lot more of that occurring.
Do we need to be concerned, Lisa, about critical infrastructure, the things that keep our state going?
Oh yeah, I mean, we have a Space Force base, very
Yes.
vulnerable in
Sure.
Brevard County. And a lot of, when we've got
And
a
the Kennedy
nuclear
Space
power
Center.
plant on
Yeah.
our coast. So yes, of course, we need to be aware. And fortunately, I think that those big federal facilities are doing resiliency planning. They are. They've got, orders and federal requirements to do so. So fortunately, they are acting. We're doing a tremendous amount of work for the federal government to assist them with that planning and in strategies to address and where to move buildings. I mean, it's just the conversation that we just had, where the city of Satellite Beach says, well, we don't want to rebuild our fire station where it's going to flood in 30 years. I mean, that's the same conversation, except the facilities are much, much bigger, and they're billions of dollars, but they're doing the same thought process. Oh, we need to move it, we need to move it.
We just kicked off a program called the Military Installation Resilience Review, and where DoD has done a fantastic job looking inside the fence line and building up and strengthening and hardening their infrastructure internally. They have an office called the Office of Local Defense and Community Cooperation, who helps local governments that support the installations look outside the fence line and build and strengthen and harden the infrastructure on the outside of the fence line. That program just got kicked off in our region, which we're very fortunate to work with them. I think Space Force and even NSA Orlando, which is an internal installation, their presence in this region is very important to as an economic driver, and having the ability to look at those issues and examine infrastructure that supports those installations is really something that we're looking forward to moving in that direction.
Does the way we tackle zoning, construction incentives have to be tailored specifically for our region? Because I've covered the resiliency efforts that have taken place, for example, in Miami Beach, where they've kind of jacked buildings up. I mean, the whole city is essentially higher, the streets are higher, business has been raised up, pumping stations, walls, and so on. I wonder whether there are unique challenges to doing resiliency where we are in Central Florida, Lisa.
There's a process that called a vulnerability assessment that cities and counties and regions can participate in, and it gets funded by the state of Florida, where they can go into their community and understand very specifically what their issues are. Each community has their own unique situation. In the inland here in Central Florida, temperature might be more of an issue than water, or it could be that because they have perched aquifers, their stormwater doesn't have enough anywhere for it to drain down. So when it rains, it sits on the surface for longer, so everything is going to pond. Different than maybe farther south or farther north. So each community kind of has to look at their vulnerability themselves. What do they think is vulnerable? So trying to redesign the entire stormwater infrastructure to deal with what is probably going to be the 500-year storm that's coming. Every couple of years. It is going to be unique for each for each community.
Jennifer.
Yeah, absolutely. And those vulnerability assessments really focus in on an asset and what's happening to that asset, the amount of exposure it has to any type of element. And we've really tried to take it a step further within the collaborative itself, or the Regional Planning Council. We've identified the drivers of vulnerability in this region. And that really allows us to, yes, we're going to respond, we're going to get better at response and build things back better and do everything in that way, but we're also going to lean into some transformative change in this region. So to take those vulnerability assessments and really look at a particular asset and who it serves and how some might be prioritized in different ways, higher than others because of the people that they serve and the populations they serve, is really a way that we are uniquely addressing vulnerability assessments as we're moving forward in East Central Florida anyway.
Darcy, what do you think?
So from a Brevard County perspective, we're seeing a lot of residential development being driven by all the space activity going on.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do from our perspective in terms of comprehensive plan and land development regulations is we're in the middle of doing our what they call the EAR. Every 7 years you look at your comprehensive plan and see where it needs to be tweaked. Now we need to figure out how do we take these concepts we came up with that were adopted by the Board of County Commissioners. I mean, it was a very successful activity. Yeah. How do we now implement those? How do we get out of the way of innovation? Because some of the stuff that we have, we recognize is not allowing people to be innovative if they want to be. So that's what we're working on now, is to how do we get the parallel flood policies implemented for developers to use. They have to have the tools to use them, or they're not going to use them.
One thing that Hurricane Ian showed us was that resiliency is not just an issue in coastal areas, right? I mean, there are resiliency issues being faced everywhere. Huge amounts of flooding in Seminole County and in Osceola County. How do you tell people that they should be concerned about these issues if they live 50 miles away from the coast? What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, it's hard to, so it is hard to get humans to get excited about something that might happen to them in the future,
Yeah.
right? We've seen that. So I think once Ian goes through, then people are more likely to listen to you. So you can wait for the emergency to happen, and now you've got an active listening audience. Unfortunately, you know, we're very reactive, we humans. I'm a planner, you're a planner, we're probably all planners
Yes.
here. So we like to be more proactive. We like to plan for things to happen, but as a species, we tend to be reactive.
We do,
So,
for
you know, once the storm goes through, that's the time to make the political changes. That's the time to make the move. The state is investing, right? The state is coming to the table with force and money and ideas and technical capabilities, and we need it. So I'm more optimistic than I've been in my career ever in Florida with what changes are being made, with what local government's bringing to the table, what our governor and our state government is bringing to the table, and the federal government as well. You know, we're doing a lot of federal work right now. But I'm really encouraged with the vision that we have in Florida and the momentum that we're beginning to aspire to. We're just getting rolling, but I can feel the momentum coming.
Well, let's talk about whether you guys are optimistic. What do you think, Darcy? Are you optimistic for the future of our coastal areas and our inland areas too, of course?
Depends on what day you ask me, but yes, in general, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Brevard County, when you talk about differences of other areas, you look at Volusia County, where their beaches are hardened. They're already hardened with giant, massive condos on there. Miami, same thing. Brevard County still has natural shorelines, even where they're developed. We do not allow hardening seawalls on the beach. And so seeing the benefits of engineering with nature and how do you use natural infrastructure to actually address these issues, living shorelines, wetland restoration and preservation, and trying to use what we have left to assist us in managing water and not just on the coast.
When I first started with the city, the first meeting that we had about climate change, and we put the words climate change meeting here, on our marquee, and we had a lot of people, why are you doing this? This is not necessary, this is a waste of money. And now we have the meetings now where we're talking about what is the city going to look like? Are we going to go ahead and create codes to elevate structures?
Yeah.
How is that going to happen? And they're great conversations. So it's very exciting to see that, and I think if we can continue on and marching forward and making some good land use policy statewide, as well as statewide transportation changes and investing in our public transportation and start reducing emissions, I would be really happy.
Jennifer, last word to you. You optimistic? Do you agree with what you've heard here?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of hope in this work. There is nothing like a hazard to be the great unifier, right? We all experience things in the shared humanity the same way, whether it's flood, fire, or whatever that impact is. And I think when you talk about efficiency and effectiveness in government structures and really working from a whole of government perspective, you're seeing that at every level of government, whether it's federal, state, regional, and local. Even thinking about the women on this stage, that I find a lot of hope in the work that we're doing, the relationships we've built, and the connections that we continue to work together for the greater good.
A portion of our Newsnight discussion on resiliency work in Florida that took place in May. We'll return next Friday night at 8:30 with a regular episode of the program. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.
Knowledge is power, especially during hurricane season. Make sure you're in the know with WUCF, your online source for emergency weather information. From the latest storm track and projections to emergency information for where you live, plus resources to prepare your children for unexpected events and emergencies. Keep your family safe. Stay informed with WUCF.org/stormcenter.
Newsnight is going on the road. You're invited to join us October 2nd for a live recording of Newsnight Conversations, Election 2024, at the Bev Event Center in Kissimmee. Registration is open at WUCF.org/Newsnight Election.